Stevie Wonder, the immortal architect of soul, the voice behind Isn't She Lovely and Superstition, the man who brought light to the hearts of millions, is not just a musician. He is light forged out of darkness. From the cramped neighborhoods of Detroit to the grandest concert halls on earth, he rose like a miracle, a blind child who turned his eternal night into the sound of hope. His fingers spoke the language of angels. His voice carried the weight of generations, and his songs became the heartbeat of love, loss, and freedom. For more than 6 decades, his music has outlived wars, eras, and pain. A living testament that true genius sees beauty through the soul, not the eyes. Time and again, fate tried to break him. Born without sight, 3 marriages shattered, 9 children caught between distance and love, lawsuits that tore at his peace, and a body slowly surrendering to the cruelty of time. Each wound carved deep into his heart. Yet he stood strong and rose above it all. In this video, you will witness the hardships Stevie Wonder has endured and the merciless storms he still faces at 75. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like as a gesture of honor for this extraordinary talent and unbreakable spirit. It is devastating to imagine a life condemned to darkness before it ever had the chance to see the light. No light, no color, no shape, only the hiss of machines keeping a fragile heartbeat alive. Some destinies are shaped not by choice but by tragedy, and his began with a cruel irony. The very breath that saved him would also steal his sight forever. Every legend carries a wound the world cannot see, and for him, that wound was darkness itself. On May 13, 1950, in the industrial town of Saginaw, Michigan, a premature child named Steve Hardaway Judkins entered the world 6 weeks too soon. Doctors fought for his tiny life, flooding the incubator with oxygen. It worked, but at a terrible cost. The overdose scarred his retinas, leaving him blind before he ever saw his mother's face. Lula Mae Hardaway wept beneath the hospital's gray morning light, whispering prayers of thanks and sorrow. She held her newborn son as sunlight spilled across the floor. Light he would never see, but one day would make the world feel. The Judkins family had little more than faith to live on. Calvin, his father, labored odd jobs, his pride worn thin by poverty and anger. Their small house shook with arguments and the ache of unpaid bills. Some nights there was no dinner, only Lula's trembling voice singing hymns to drown the hunger. When Calvin finally walked away, she was left with 6 children and nothing but her hands. Calloused, cracked, and bleeding from scrubbing strangers' floors, those hands built a home out of love and endurance. By 1954, she gathered her children and boarded a bus bound for Detroit, chasing survival through a snowstorm that cut like glass. The city was cold, loud, and unwelcoming, but in its noise, her blind son heard something divine. Their apartment was no bigger than a prayer, walls sweating from the winter damp. Frost crept through the window seams, but Lula's faith burned warmer than any furnace. Stevie, too small to reach the window, would sit near the heater's hum and listen to footsteps in the hallway, to distant horns, to the breath of the world. He could not see the city's light, but he memorized its rhythm, its pulse, its pain, its promise. At a small Baptist church in Detroit, Lula's faith became his compass. While other children played, Stevie sat by the organ, his tiny fingers exploring the keys like a pilgrim tracing the face of God. The choir's voices became his sky, the clapping hands his sunlight, the drum beat his heartbeat. Every vibration, every echo, every whisper of sound was a color in his unseen world. He learned the whistle of trains, the rustle of coats in the pews, the rhythm of rain on cracked glass, transforming them into melody and meaning. By age 9, he could play the piano, drums, and harmonica all by ear. His world had never known light, yet it shimmered with sound. Years later, he would remember, "I may not have seen with my eyes, but I've always seen with my heart." In those years of darkness, faith, and hunger, his heart learned to see through pain, through rhythm, through the music that became his light. And so, from a life born in shadow, a miracle began to hum. Fragile, defiant, unstoppable. The boy who could not see was already teaching the world how to listen. The boy born without sight was already teaching the world how to listen. But the world hadn't truly heard him yet. Destiny was waiting, hidden behind a stranger's voice in the creak of a studio door in Detroit. In 1961, when he was just 11, a member of the Miracles named Ronnie White stopped to listen to a small boy playing the harmonica on a freezing street corner. The winter wind gnawed at his thin coat, his fingers cracked and raw. Yet the sound that spilled from that dented harmonica was pure and bright as sunlight through stained glass. White stood frozen, realizing he was hearing something divine, something that no pair of eyes could ever behold. Within weeks, he brought the boy to Barry Gordy, the visionary founder of Motown Records, a label already rewriting the soul of America. When Gordy heard him play, he smiled and whispered, "That's a wonder." And so, the boy who came from hunger, faith, and silence gained a name that would never fade: Little Stevie Wonder. The studio where he first recorded was hardly more than a cold box with cables and dreams. The walls were patched with cardboard to block the draft, but to Stevie, it was a cathedral. He could feel the pulse of the drums beneath his feet, the breath of brass against his skin, the heartbeat of music guiding him through a world he could not see. His small hands traced the piano keys like reading a secret language from heaven. He recorded the jazz soul of Little Stevie in tribute to Uncle Ray, not as lessons, but as testimonies. When the red recording light turned off, he went home to a narrow apartment in Detroit where the heat sputtered and the nights bit with frost. Fame was still a rumor. Hunger was a fact. Sometimes there was no coal for the furnace. Lula, his mother, would wrap him in her own coat, humming hymns to keep him warm. He would answer with faint notes from his harmonica as if trading melodies for fire, a child building warmth out of sound. By 1963, the miracle found its stage. Motown sent him on tour with the Motown Revue, a rolling family of legends: Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, and the Temptations. The buses rattled through endless nights, the seats stiff and cold, the smell of fried food and exhaustion clinging to the air. Stevie was just 12, far from home, clutching his harmonica like a compass through the dark. Sometimes he would wake to the sound of tires humming beneath him and whisper his mother's name. But when the lights came up and the crowd began to roar, all fear melted. On stage, he was unstoppable. Then came the night that changed everything. His live performance of Fingertips Part 2 erupted into pure electricity. The audience stood clapping, shouting, crying his name. At 13, Stevie Wonder became the youngest solo artist ever to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But fame, like light, can flicker. As he grew older, his voice began to change. The angelic soprano that had carried him to stardom broke and deepened. Suddenly, the applause grew thin. In the Motown hallways, whispers spread like smoke. The wonder's gone. He could hear the doubt in the silence between closed doors. For the first time, the world's darkness wasn't around him. It was inside him. Nights stretched long, and the harmonica that once sang for joy now sat quiet on the table. Maybe, he once recalled, they thought the boy had finished his song. But heaven wasn't done with him yet. Sylvia Moy, a songwriter with eyes that saw what others missed, refused to let his fire go out. One evening, she placed his hands on the piano and whispered, "Play what's left in you, not what's gone." He smiled faintly and played as if his soul were breaking open. The result was uptight. Everything's all right, raw, joyful, defiant, a rebirth in rhythm. It wasn't just a song, it was resurrection. Stevie Wonder had lost his sight, his voice, and his certainty more than once. But each time he turned pain into rhythm and silence into song. He didn't just make music, he embodied it. And in the echo of his struggle lived a truth that outlasts any spotlight. Light, when born from darkness, doesn't just burn, it teaches the world how to see. And the world did see. They saw a man who turned silence into symphonies, a visionary who changed not only the sound of America, but the heartbeat of the world. Yet even light casts a shadow, and every genius must learn to walk through it alone. By 1971, at just 21, Stevie Wonder made a choice that defied reason. He walked away from Motown, the empire that had made him famous. He wanted freedom, not safety, truth, not approval. For the first time in his life, he was blind and unbound, carrying only his faith and the fire within him. In a small rented studio in Los Angeles, he began again from nothing. He slept beside his keyboards, ate cold sandwiches at 300 a.m., and worked until the morning light touched the blinds. Music, he said later, wasn't what I did, it was what I breathed. Between 1972 and 1976, he created a storm of sound that would redefine music forever. Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Fulfillingness, First Finale, and Songs in the Key of Life. Each one was a revolution not made in comfort, but in chaos. He played almost every instrument himself, chasing harmonies no one else could hear. Studio engineers said he worked 20 hours a day, his fingers wrapped in gauze, his ears ringing from exhaustion. Some nights he fell asleep mid-recording, his head resting on the piano, yet every dawn he woke and tried again. "Let's do it once more," he would whisper. "I can still hear what it should be." The pressure nearly broke him. He borrowed against his future royalties, pouring millions of dollars into studio time, hiring orchestras, experimenting with early synthesizers that often failed. Motown executives worried he'd lost control. The money was bleeding, and so was he, but Stevie didn't chase money, he chased truth. "If it costs everything," he once told an engineer, "then it's worth it." Then fate struck with merciless precision. It was August of 1973. The car sped down a Carolina highway, sunlight glinting off the hood, when in a single violent heartbeat, a steel beam broke loose from a flatbed truck ahead and came crashing through the windshield. There was no time to scream. The blow to his head was thunderous, and then silence. No rhythm, no melody, no light, just black. Stevie Wonder, the man who lived through sound, was thrown into a world where even sound had died. For 4 endless days, he lay in a coma, his body still, machines breathing for him. Nurses whispered his name in the sterile dark. His mother prayed, begging God not to take away the boy who had already lived without sight. Doctors feared that even if he woke, the music might never return. When he finally stirred, the room held its breath. His first words, barely a whisper, were, "Will I ever hear music again?" He did, but the music that came back was different. Heavier, haunted, echoing with the crash that almost ended him. For months, he battled searing headaches, blinding dizziness, fragments of memory that slipped like sand through his fingers. The world heard his triumphant comeback. Only he felt the tremor of fear behind every note. Even years later, he would admit that sometimes in the quiet between his songs, he could still hear that moment, the metal, the shattering glass, the scream of fate itself. From that darkness, he rebuilt himself. Out of pain came inner visions, out of silence, sound. When Stevie Wonder finally stood on the Grammy stage, eyes closed behind his dark glasses, and said softly, "Thank you for letting me share what I hear." The world applauded, but only he knew the price of that sound. By 1976, he poured his remaining soul into songs in the key of life. 2 years, 200 musicians, endless revisions, and debts so heavy even Motown trembled. But when it finally released, it didn't just sell, it soared. Over 10 million albums sold. 3 Grammys, including Album of the Year, his 3rd in a row, a record no solo artist has ever matched. At his peak, Stevie earned $15 million a year, the equivalent of $120,000 every single day in today's money. The boy who once wrapped himself in his mother's coat to keep warm was now a global icon. And yet sometimes wealth can sound a lot like loneliness. The world saw the smile, not the sacrifice. Behind studio doors, he battled exhaustion, migraines, and the relentless pull of expectation. Motown wanted more hits. The world wanted another miracle, but miracles cannot be ordered. He worked through pain, through doubt, through nights when even his faith trembled. Once an assistant found him asleep in the control room, the tape still rolling, his hand resting gently on the keyboard, as if afraid to let go of the sound. He rose again in the 1980s as a global voice for justice, performing for presidents and peace. But the crown was heavy. The applause that once lifted him now echoed with fatigue. People hear the songs, he told a friend, but they don't hear the hours that made them. And yet he never stopped. Through the noise and the silence, through fame and fatigue, Stevie kept creating because for him, creation was survival. When asked how he endured it all, he smiled and said, "I guess I've always been chasing the same thing, that one note that sounds like peace." Even at the height of fame, he carried the hum of home in his heart, the gospel of his mother, Lula, who once wrapped him in her coat on winter nights and whispered, "God's not done with you yet." She was right. Stevie Wonder had conquered the world. But every night when the lights dimmed and the crowds went home, he would still reach for something he could never quite hold. The quiet heartbeat of peace he'd been chasing all along. It breaks the heart to know that life never once showed him mercy. From the blindness of childhood to the blinding light of fame, he endured it all. Yet when it came to love, even that light turned cold. She was the first light he ever saw without his eyes. Sarita Wright, a voice like silk, a spirit that glowed with the same quiet fire he carried inside. They met in the Motown studios, two souls surrounded by sound. Stevie listened to the way her laughter curved through the air, the soft rhythm of her words that made every silence feel alive. She became his confidant, his collaborator, his mirror. Together, they wrote songs that felt like promises, signed, sealed, delivered. "I'm yours," the declaration of a young man who believed love could out-sing time itself. In 1970, at just 20 years old, Stevie married Sarita, who was 24, not in grandeur, but in faith. Two dreamers who believed that music could hold the world together. For a while, it did. Their apartment was filled with melodies instead of arguments. Nights glowed with shared creation, their voices entwined like prayer. Theirs was a love born in harmony, fragile, radiant, and impossibly human. But harmony, even in music, is delicate. As Stevie's fame soared and the world demanded more of him, time began to slip away. Long tours, endless studio sessions, interviews, exhaustion. The applause outside grew louder as the home inside grew quiet. Sarita had her own light, her own dreams, and the more he chased sound, the more distance grew between them. Friends remembered nights when he came home long after midnight, still humming new melodies while she waited by the piano. The candles burned to wax. They loved each other deeply, but the rhythm that once bound them began to falter. They never had children, but their songs became the only offspring of their brief union. Melodies born of love and silence alike. Sometimes, when the silence pressed too heavily, Stevie would wonder if his future children would one day feel the same emptiness he once knew. That cold ache of a door closing and never opening again. It was the fear that haunted him more than fame, more than blindness, the fear of becoming the silence he once survived. In 1972, barely 22, they parted gently, painfully, like a song that fades instead of ending. Yet even as their marriage dissolved, the bond between them did not. They left the marriage with no bitterness, no fight for possessions. Only the quiet understanding that what they once owned together was music, and that would always remain. "She was my friend, my teacher, and my mirror." Stevie would later recall softly, "I think we both loved too much too soon and didn't yet know how to hold on to something so bright." Years turned and both followed separate paths, but some harmonies never fade. When Sarita was diagnosed with cancer decades later, Stevie visited quietly, away from cameras and headlines. By 2004, he was 54, old enough to know that some goodbyes echo for the rest of your life. At a memorial, he stood motionless, head bowed, his fingers resting on the piano lid, tracing invisible notes only he could hear. As the choir sang softly, he whispered, "She's singing again now, I can hear her." Some said his lips moved, not in words, but in prayer. It wasn't grief alone, it was gratitude. The kind that only comes from a love that teaches you how to see without sight and how to lose without bitterness. For Stevie Wonder, Sarita was not just a chapter. She was a verse that never stopped echoing. Their marriage was brief, but its melody endures in every note he plays. Through the years, he poured her spirit into songs of hope and heartbreak, as if keeping her alive in sound. The world remembers the legend. He remembers the woman who believed in him before the world did. And though love turned to distance and distance turned to memory, the music they made together still hums like a quiet prayer, proof that even when love breaks, it can still sing forever. For him, love was never lost. It simply changed its tune. It is heartbreaking to think that the man who gave the world so much joy found his own peace only in the quiet laughter of his children. After the end of his marriage to Sarita Wright, Stevie entered a chapter where fame could no longer fill the silence of his nights, and then came a voice soft, calm, steady. Yolanda Simmons was not a celebrity or a muse from a stage light. She was a woman who saw the man, not the legend. She worked in his M-Town office, often reading letters to him, making sure he ate, reminding him to rest. From that gentleness came something purer than passion, comfort. In 1975, she gave birth to his daughter, Aisha Morris. And for the first time, Stevie heard a sound that changed his life forever. His child's laughter. Sitting beside the bathtub, recording the giggles of his newborn, he whispered through tears, "This is what love sounds like." That moment became, "Isn't she lovely?" Not just a song, but a hymn of gratitude from a man who had lived his life in darkness and now finally felt the warmth of light. The years that followed were full of motion, albums, tours, crowds, and applause. Yet amid the chaos, Stevie found small sanctuaries of fatherhood. In 1977, Yolanda gave birth to their son, Kata Morris, and the family expanded like a melody unfolding verse by verse. But as his fame climbed higher, time with them grew shorter. Yolanda stayed home, raising 2 children while the world claimed the man she loved. Sometimes Stevie would return from the studio before dawn, shoes in hand, careful not to wake anyone. He would touch Aisha's curls, listen to Kata's breath, and sit at the piano playing lullabies for sleeping children. "I wanted them to feel my presence even when I wasn't there," he later said. But love, like rhythm, can slip out of sync. By the late 1970s, their bond began to fade, not out of anger but exhaustion. They parted quietly, 2 kind souls who had simply drifted apart, yet remained forever tied by the music they had made together, their children. Then came Melody McCulley, her very name like fate's foreshadowing. She entered his life in 1979, not as a whirlwind, but as calm after the storm. She wasn't drawn to fame. She brought silence, grounding, and care. Stevie was older now, 30, and weary from years of brilliance and loneliness. With Melody, there were no promises of forever, only moments of peace. In 1983, she gave birth to his son, Mumaz Morris, and Stevie, now a father for the 3rd time, held the child close, whispering, "You are my quiet song." It was a gentler kind of love, one that healed rather than burned. He would often take Mumaz into the studio, letting the boy fall asleep to the sound of harmonas and heartbeat rhythms. When asked later what fatherhood had taught him, he smiled and said, "It taught me to listen, not just to music, but to life." Though both Yolanda and Melody eventually went their own ways, their presence never left him. Through Aisha, who grew up to sing beside her father, through Kata's laughter, and through Mumaz, who followed in his musical footsteps, Stevie's life found its truest harmony, one written not in fame, but in family. On stage years later, when Aisha sang with him under the lights, he turned toward her voice and smiled, unable to see her face, but feeling every note. "I may never see her," he once said, "but I hear her, and that's enough." From 1975 to 1983, through Love Found and Lost, through the births of 3 children and the breaking of 2 hearts, Stevie Wonder discovered that the greatest song he would ever write was not for the world, but for the lives he brought into it. And even now, long after the applause fades, that song, the laughter of his children, still echoes as warm and eternal as light itself. It had been 3 long years since the warmth of Melody McCulley's laughter faded from his life. 3 years of hotels that echoed with applause, yet emptied into silence. He was 36 then, a man adored by millions, crowned a genius of soul. And yet, beneath the ovations, his body etched, his faith wavered, and his heart was quietly starving. That was when she appeared. Angela McGaffey did not arrive with fame or fireworks. She entered like a soft voice through the dark, calm, patient, deliberate. She organized his days, his medicine, his rest. She labeled his kitchen jars in Braille by hand, humming gospel hymns under her breath. "You need someone to care for you," she told him once. "Not just your gift." Her voice carried no agenda, only grace, and in that gentleness he felt something he had forgotten, peace without condition. What began as kindness deepened into companionship, and what began as companionship became love, a love that healed by holding, not by burning. Angela was still in her 20s with a whole life ahead of her. Yet she quietly laid it at the feet of a man twice broken, giving the best years of her youth to his silence, her laughter to his exhaustion. For 13 years, they shared a rhythm that felt like prayer, mornings of whispered routines, nights of quiet meals, hands finding each other in the dark. Friends said she steadied him, grounding the storm of his genius. On weary mornings when the world demanded too much, she guided his hand to his coffee, pressed her palms to his temples, and murmured, "You're still the light." In those moments, she was not his caretaker. She was his calm, the heartbeat behind the legend, but love built on healing is fragile. Gratitude can turn into gravity. The more she protected him, the more he depended on her. The more he leaned, the more she forgot how to stand alone. By the mid-1990s, the harmony they'd composed began to unravel. Fame still called his name, cities still swallowed his nights, and the applause that once thrilled him now left him hollow. She waited for him in the half-lit house, candles sinking into wax, meals gone cold. He returned long after midnight, too drained to speak. Their love became duty, her care became control. Some nights he played the same 3 notes on the piano again and again, as if begging the universe for balance. One night the song stopped. She folded his shirts, closed her suitcase, and placed his glasses on the piano, the same piano where they had once dreamed of forever. The click of the zipper echoed through the room. A sound small enough to be missed, yet sharp enough to break a man's heart. "Some goodbyes don't echo," he said later. "They just sink." 13 years together, a lifetime in borrowed time, ended not in anger but in exhaustion. But love seldom ends where silence begins. By 1999, their story turned to paper. Accusations, replies, settlements, the headlines screamed. He stayed silent. "The world wanted anger," a journalist wrote. He gave them grace. Behind that, grace was pain too deep to perform. She had raised his children as if they were her own, yet never had one of her own. When the case quietly closed, there was no victory, no villain, only 2 souls emptied by devotion. Whatever money changed hands could end the fight, but not the ache. Years later, reflecting on those days, Stevie whispered, "She loved me more than I knew how to love back." It was not confession. It was understanding. Today, he remembers her not through bitterness, but through the stillness she once brought him. The songs he wrote in the years that followed, softer, slower, almost whispered, carried traces of her patience. "Love is never the mistake," he once said, "expectation is." That single line became his gospel of forgiveness. Angela McGaffey was never his enemy. She was the chapter that taught him endurance, that even broken love can leave light behind. Their story is not a scandal, but a scripture of care, fatigue, and costly truth. And as the years fold into silence, one truth remains. The man who could not see still teaches the world how to feel, reminding us that love's purpose is not to last, but to make us gentler, even when it's gone. Love, it seems, has a way of finding him when he's least ready for it. After years of music louder than his own heart, Stevie Wonder had learned to live in the quiet until the quiet began to ache. Stevie was approaching 50, and for the first time in decades, the music in his heart had grown quiet. Then, like sunlight breaking through rain, she appeared. Kai Millard, a fashion designer with a quiet grace and a voice that carried calm instead of applause. They met in 1999, and almost instantly something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of 2 souls who had both learned how to begin again. "I was tired of being saved," he once said. "I just wanted peace." And Kai, elegant, grounded, luminous, brought exactly that. 2 years later, in 2001, they married. It wasn't grand or public. It was private, sacred, and full of promise. Their home pulsed with warmth and music. That same year, their first son, Calland, arrived, a tiny heartbeat that changed everything. Stevie would sit beside the crib long after midnight, playing lullabies so soft, even the walls seemed to hum along. "Isn't she lovely?" had once been for a daughter. Now it became a father's prayer for a son. 4 years later came Mandela, named in honor of Nelson Mandela, the embodiment of grace and endurance. "Holding my boys," Stevie told Oprah, "is the closest I've ever come to seeing light." Between tours, studio sessions, and his tireless work for social causes, he always made time for their bedtime songs, for first steps, for laughter echoing through hallways. The Wonder household for a while was everything he had once dreamed of. Rhythm, laughter, and peace. "When I'm with them," he said, "I don't need eyes to see. I can see through their joy, but even harmony can grow weary." By the late 2000s, the demands of fame began pressing against the walls of their family life. Kai's fashion career flourished, drawing her into new circles and across continents. Stevie, meanwhile, carried the relentless weight of expectation. Concerts, recordings, charity events, awards, endless travel. His health, strained by years of touring, began to waver. Nights grew longer and words fewer. They still loved one another deeply, even gently, but the rhythm between them faltered. Sometimes love doesn't leave, he reflected years later. It just changes its shape. There were nights when he returned from tour to find the house dim, the piano covered, the boys asleep. He would sit alone in the dark, tracing the piano keys with his fingers, but no sound came. In that silence, he understood it wasn't music he had lost, it was presence. The family he had longed for all his life was slipping through his hands. Not through anger, but through time. In 2012, after more than a decade together, Stevie filed for divorce. There were no headlines of fury, no cruel words, no scandal, just two people too tired to keep, fighting the distance between them. The paperwork was quiet, the separation gentle. "We'll always be family," he said softly, his voice carrying both peace and sorrow. By 2015, it was done. Stevie agreed to pay $25,000 a month in child support, not as obligation, but as protection, ensuring his sons would never feel the instability that once haunted his own childhood. The court arranged shared custody. The boys lived with Kai, but Stevie visited often. Birthdays, recital, ordinary weekends filled with laughter and small joys. "I never wanted them to wonder if I'd show up," he told a friend, "because I remember what wondering feels like." After the divorce, Stevie and Kai spoke little, but never with bitterness. "She was the peace I needed, even if I couldn't keep it," he said in a 2017 interview. Kai, when asked about him, answered simply, "He's a kind man. He loves deeply." That gentleness remained their bridge long after love had changed its form. When Kayland began performing on stage, Stevie stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, smiling. "I want them to see that love doesn't end when people do," he told Oprah. "It continues in how we treat each other." Years later, reflecting on that chapter, Stevie spoke of gratitude, not loss. Gratitude for laughter, for the sons, for mornings filled with hope. "She taught me," he said, "that family isn't built on forever. It's built on forgiveness." In that wisdom lies the essence of his journey, a man who was denied sight, yet taught the world how to see through love. Kai was never just a wife. She was the final verse in his long education of the heart. From her he learned that even when harmony breaks, the melody remains, and so he kept singing. Softer now, slower, but full of faith. Because for Stevie Wonder, love, fragile, fleeting, but eternal in spirit, is still the brightest sound in the dark. There are some loves that don't arrive to change your life, but to heal what's left of it. After decades of triumphs and storms, Stevie Wonder no longer searched for passion or perfection. Only peace. And peace at last came quietly in the gentle strength of Tamar Robin Bracey. She wasn't a star or a singer. She was a teacher, a woman who spoke softly and listened deeply, who saw the man long hidden behind the legend. When they met in 2012, Stevie was 62, a man who had already survived fame, loss, and the weight of being a miracle. Tama was 42, grounded and steady, radiant in unassuming ways. "She didn't chase my light," he would later say. "She brought her own." Their story didn't begin beneath spotlights, but under ordinary light, the kind that falls across kitchen counters and early mornings. Stevie's music had slowed. His body had begun to yield to time. Tamika became his quiet rhythm, marking his pills, cooking his meals, reminding him to rest when the world still demanded more. "She takes care of the man, not the musician," a friend once said. They shared laughter, long walks, and whispered prayers before bed. When he sang to her, it wasn't to impress. It was gratitude turned into melody, and when she laughed, he said it sounded like home. For a man who had lived his life surrounded by applause, her silence was the first sound that ever truly comforted him. In 2014, they welcomed their first child together. A daughter whose first cry rewrote every song he'd ever known. 2 years later, another child followed, a son whose laughter danced through the house like sunlight through open blinds. Stevie, now in his mid-60s, often said, "I never thought I'd be a father again at this age, but life keeps singing if you keep listening." Their mornings were filled with cereal bowls clinking, toys tumbling near the piano, and the scent of coffee mingling with the hum of unfinished melodies. Sometimes, When Tama knelt to teach their children to pray, Stevie would hum softly beside them, the sound of faith and fatherhood intertwining. This, he said once in an interview, is what peace sounds like. Not the crowd, not the stage, just this, but peace, like music, demands tuning. As the years passed, exhaustion crept in. Tours, interviews, health checkups, and the endless expectation that he remain unbreakable. Tamika bore her own invisible weight. Motherhood, caretaking, and the quiet strain of loving a man shared by the world. There were nights when fatigue turned their laughter into silence, when she fell asleep before he finished a song. Yet every dawn they began again. Whenever tension rose, it was the sight of their children that drew them back. Stevie, who had once been the boy waiting for a father who never came home, now whispered to his kids, "You'll never have to wait for me." It was a promise born of pain and a vow that healed the echoes of his own lonely childhood. In 2017, they sealed that promise in marriage at the Hotel Bel Air in Los Angeles, an intimate ceremony bathed in golden light. Stevie, then 67, sang "You Are the Sunshine of My Life" for her as friends and family looked on. There were no headlines, no cameras, no spectacle. Just two souls choosing each other after years of storms. The same song that once celebrated youthful love now carried a gentler truth, that the greatest love isn't found in its beginning but in its endurance. By 2019, illness tested that endurance. Through the hum of hospital machines and the sterile chill of waiting rooms, Toma held his hand, whispering prayers between the beeps. "You're still my miracle," she told him. When he finally awoke from surgery, his first words trembled. "Am I still here?" And she smiled through tears. "You never left." For a man who had spent his life teaching the world how to listen, it was faith that now taught him how to hear. Now at 75, Stevie no longer tours the world. His music has slowed into something quieter, deeper. Not written for charts, but for gratitude. Tamika tends the garden. Their children play nearby, and the house hums with the small, beautiful chaos of love that stayed. Neighbors say that on calm evenings they can still hear piano notes drifting through the air, soft, unrecorded, full of life. When asked how he endures after everything, blindness, heartbreak, surgery, fame, Stevie smiled and said, "I endure because love did." He has known love that burned, love that broke, and love that vanished. But with Tamika, he found the rarest kind. Love that remains. Not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that holds your hand through silence. Gratitude, he says. Now that's my song. And perhaps after all these years, that's what his music was always reaching for. Not perfection, not fame, but peace. The kind that hums softly in the dark, like the final light that never goes out. It would be impossible to tell Stevie Wonder's story without her. The woman who carried him through darkness and raised 6 children with nothing but faith, hands, and love. The day she left this world, something in his music went quiet too. Among all the women who ever loved him, only one gave him life, faith, and music. His mother, Lula Mae Hardaway. She was the heartbeat of his childhood, the soft-voiced woman who sang away hunger and fear in a cramped Detroit apartment. She raised 6 children alone after his father walked out, scrubbing floors by day and sewing by night. Her hands cracked but steady. She never called her life hard, only blessed. "God give me a son who can't see," she once said. "But he gave me one who can show the world how to see." It was Lula who taught Stevie to listen before he could walk. She hummed hymns to him as a baby, clapped rhythms into his palms, and turned every sound into a lesson in faith. When he was discovered by Motown at 11, she followed him to the studio, holding his hand like a compass, guiding him through the noise of a world too big for a small boy. She was there at every milestone. His first record, his first tour, his first Grammy. Never taking credit, only whispering, "Remember who you are, baby." Her name appeared quietly in the credits of his early songs as a co-writer, but her true authorship was deeper. She had written the soul that powered his music. By the time he reached the heights of global fame, Stevie often said his mother was his hero, my queen, my reason for every note. Yet even heroes grow tired. In the early 2000s, Lula's health began to fail. She had spent her life pouring strength into others, and there was little left for herself. When she passed away in 2006, the world didn't hear a public cry. It heard silence. Stevie canceled appearances, withdrew from the stage, and retreated into stillness. Friends said he couldn't bring himself to touch the piano for weeks. When he finally did, he played a single song, Ribbon in the Sky, alone for her. Witnesses recalled tears tracing his cheeks as he whispered, "This is for you, Mama." Her funeral was private, simple, filled with gospel and grief. He stood beside her casket, hands trembling as if searching for the rhythm of her heartbeat one last time. Later, he said, "When she left, I lost the first sound I ever loved, her voice. But even in that loss, Lula's presence never vanished. I still talk to her," he told an interviewer years later. "Sometimes when I sing, I feel her humming with me." For a man who had built a lifetime turning pain into melody, this was the loss that quieted him the most. Yet it also became his greatest teacher. From his mother, Stevie Wonder learned that love doesn't die, it changes form. It becomes faith, memory, and the light you carry forward. Every time he sits at a piano, somewhere in the harmony, a mother's voice still sings. The world saw his triumphs, but it never saw the war his body fought in silence. For Stevie Wonder, even survival became an act of faith. After a lifetime of turning darkness into song, time itself began to test him in ways applause could not mend. The echoes of that crash in 1973 still lived quietly in his nerves. A tremor here, a wave of dizziness there. Small reminders that brilliance always has a price. His schedule, once unstoppable, now took its toll. The endless travel, the sleepless nights, the weight of decades spent giving more of himself than the body was ever meant to give. As the years pressed forward, the signs appeared. Fatigue that lingered, a body slower to heal, breath that came a little shorter after each performance. "I used to think time was my friend," he once said softly, "but now I just thank it for waiting." By his late 60s, the challenge grew heavier. Doctors warned of failing kidneys, a quiet danger that crept through his life like an uninvited shadow. Yet when Stevie spoke about it publicly in 2019, he didn't call it fear. He called it faith. "I have a donor and I'm blessed," he told his fans, his voice calm, unshaken. Behind those words stood the same courage that had carried him through every storm, not defiance but surrender to grace. While others prayed for strength, he prayed for peace. Through the long nights before surgery, Tamika stayed by his side, her hands never leaving his. The machines beeped softly, his breath steady, his spirit unbroken. When he finally opened his eyes after the transplant, weak but alive, he whispered, "Am I still here?" She smiled through tears. "You never left." In that moment, the man who had spent a lifetime teaching the world to listen heard something deeper. The sound of faith made real. Recovery was slow, but it became a second act. Gone were the long tours and blinding lights. In their place came mornings of quiet gratitude. He began walking more, eating lighter, meditating daily. The piano became both therapy and prayer. Some mornings he would play not for an audience, but for the sunlight spilling across the keys. "I don't chase perfection anymore," he said in an interview years later. "I just thank God for breath. That's music enough." Even his voice, aged and rasped with years, carried new depth. Not the boundless energy of youth, but the wisdom of endurance. His children laughing in nearby rooms became his new rhythm section. Their joy replaced the applause. For the first time, the man who had always lived in motion had learned to stand still. And in that stillness, he found peace. Today, at 75, his hands move slower, but they still find melody. His eyes have never seen the sunrise, but he greets each one with the same quiet gratitude. He knows pain, exhaustion, and the small indignities of aging. Yet he meets them not with complaint, but with reverence. "I've had my share of pain," he told a friend, "but pain reminds me I'm still alive, still needed, still loved." His life, once a symphony of motion, has become something purer, a hymn of endurance. And when he plays now, each note carries not only sound, but survival. For those who battle illness, who wake each day inside bodies that no longer obey. Stevie Wonder's story is a light that does not blind, but warms. It reminds us that health is not just measured in strength, but in gratitude. That even when the body bends, the spirit can stand unbroken. He has spent 75 years proving one truth. The body may grow frail, but the soul never fades. And in every fragile breath, every trembling note, Stevie Wonder still sings, not to defeat time, but to thank it for letting him stay. Now, at 75 years old, Stevie Wonder lives the life he once only dreamed of. Not one of excess, but of meaning, peace, and gratitude. From a blind boy in the narrow streets of Detroit to a man whose voice reshaped the sound of humanity, his journey stands as one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history. Today, his net worth is estimated at around $200 million, a fortune not inherited but earned note by note, heartbeat by heartbeat, over more than 6 decades of creation. Yet behind the numbers lies something far more profound. The story of a man who began with nothing but faith and turned it into an empire of sound, love, and legacy. His home fittingly mirrors the man himself. Elegant, grounded, but filled with warmth. Nestled in the gated enclave of Bear, Los Angeles, Stevie's 20,000-square-foot mansion once belonged to a Saudi prince. Valued at nearly $14 million, the estate gleams with marble floors, cascading staircases, and soaring glass walls that welcome the California light he's never seen but always felt. Inside, 12 bedrooms and 15 bathrooms open into sunlit spaces where family laughter replaces applause. There's a music studio where melodies still drift through the air late at night. A garden where his wife Tamika tends flowers with their 2 young children, and a grand piano sitting beneath a skylight, positioned exactly where the morning light falls. Even though Stevie cannot see it, he says he can feel the light in the air. Neighbors say that sometimes just before dusk, the faint sound of his piano escapes into the street. Quiet, slow, tender, like a prayer whispered to time itself. But Bel-Air is only one chapter of his physical legacy. Over the years, he's owned homes in Calabasas, the Hollywood Hills, and Alpine, New Jersey, each reflecting a stage of his evolution from prodigy to patriarch. The Calabasas estate once shared with his former wife Kai Millard and their sons Calland, and Mandla remains a beloved family space. Valued at $15 million, it's a Spanish-style villa filled with memories of his children's laughter echoing through the halls. Beyond real estate, Stevie's taste for elegance extends to his car collection, though he's never driven a single one himself. His garage has held treasures like the Rolls-Royce Phantom, Bentley Continental GT, and a Mercedes-Maybach S650, each worth between $200,000 to $500,000. He often gifts cars to family or staff, saying, "If I can't drive them, at least they should bring someone else joy." He's also known for his love of luxury watches. Patek Philippe and Audemars pig among them, but his most valued piece, he once said, is the one that tells me I still have time. Despite the wealth and prestige, Stevie's heart remains devoted to service. Over the years, he has donated millions of dollars to humanitarian and educational causes, quietly supporting initiatives for the blind, underprivileged youth, and global hunger relief. He helped raise funds for AIDS research, disaster relief in Haiti, and education programs across Africa. In 1985, his leadership helped create the anthem "We Are the World," which raised over $60 million for famine relief. More recently, he's focused on mentoring young artists and funding scholarships for children with disabilities, saying, "Music gave me freedom. I want every child to feel that too." In recognition of his lifelong humanitarian efforts, he was named a United Nations Messenger of Peace in 2009 and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama in 2014. Honors that reflect not just what he's achieved, but what he's given. Today, his daily life is slower, sacred in its simplicity. Mornings begin with family breakfasts, his little ones giggling as he hums old Motown tunes. Afternoons are spent writing or meditating in his garden, and evenings often end at the piano where his fingers still find magic in silence. He no longer performs full-time, but when he does appear for charity concerts or special tributes, the world still stops to listen. His voice may have softened with age, but the spirit within it has only deepened. "Every note I play now," he says, "is a thank you to life, to love, to time for letting me stay." For a man who started with no sight, no wealth, and no guarantees, Stevie Wonder has built a life that embodies vision, the kind that doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. He has known the darkness of loss, the fatigue of fame, and the frailty of the human body. Yet he stands as living proof that gratitude can turn any struggle into strength. His journey is not just the story of a musician. It is the story of the human spirit refusing to surrender. And so, as the sun sets on yet another golden California evening, the faint echo of a piano drifts through the Bel Air air. A melody, soft, eternal, reminding the world that light does not need sight to shine. Stevie Wonder's life is not a song that ended, but one that continues to teach, to heal, and to inspire. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to honor it. Press like or leave a red heart below. May your own journey be blessed with peace, joy, health, and the kind of abundance that fills your soul as well as your life.